I never thought I'd end up in an all-out war with my HOA, but when my neighbor broke into my garage, twice, it became a battle of wits, rules, and revenge. How far would she go? Watch till the end to find out. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more crazy stories. The perfect neighbor? I never thought I'd be the type to get caught up in a full-blown neighborhood feud, especially not one involving the HOA. But if you've ever dealt with an HOA, you'd know that reason and logic often get tossed out the window the moment a power-hungry board member gets involved. I'm Ethan Carter, a software developer who works from home. I moved to Maplewood Estates 3 years ago, thinking I had found my dream home. The neighborhood was peaceful, the houses were well-maintained, and the community had a charming, suburban feel. Most importantly, my house had the perfect setup for me. The previous owners had converted half of the garage into a home office, with large windows and a quiet workspace, ideal for someone who spends most of their time coding. I still had a covered carport in the back for my car, so it wasn't like I was short on parking space. Everything was perfect. Until Linda Barnes moved in next door. From the moment Linda stepped foot into Maplewood Estates, it was clear she was here to run things. She was in her mid-50s, always dressed in crisp, pastel-colored blouses, her perfectly angled, blonde bob haircut never a strand out of place. She drove a spotless white Lexus SUV with a personalized license plate that read, Linda Time, as if the whole world should operate on her schedule. And oh boy, did she love rules. Within 2 months, Linda had wormed her way onto the HOA board and quickly became its most zealous enforcer. It wasn't enough that she followed the rules. She needed everyone else to follow them too, exactly as she saw fit. And I, unfortunately, became her favorite target. It started with little things. The potted succulents on my front porch? Not approved vegetation. I had to move them to the backyard. My garbage bins, apparently visible from the street 30 minutes too long after collection. Another HOA notice. My mailbox? The shade of gray was too dark and clashed with the HOA's preferred aesthetic. At first, I played along. I moved the plants, adjusted my trash schedule, and even repainted my mailbox to avoid confrontation. But it soon became clear that compliance wouldn't make her stop. It only encouraged her. Every week, a new printed notice would land in my mailbox. If not that, then a passive-aggressive text message. And if not that, a visit in person, where Linda would step just a little too close, smiling in that overly sweet, patronizing way that made my skin crawl. Ethan, honey, we all have to follow the same rules. It's what keeps our property values high. You understand, don't you? I'm just doing my job as a board member. I understood, all right. Linda didn't want to maintain property values. She wanted control. And then, one rainy afternoon, Linda crossed the line from annoying to downright insane. The first invasion. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was in the middle of an important video conference with a high-profile client. The meeting was going smoothly, until I heard a car horn blaring outside. Long, loud, relentless. At first I ignored it, assuming it was some impatient delivery driver. But after 5 straight minutes, I had no choice but to mute my mic and check what the hell was going on. Stepping onto my porch with an umbrella, I froze in disbelief. Linda Barnes was parked in my carport, sitting in her Lexus, aggressively honking her horn and glaring at me through the windshield. I walked over, cautiously, as she rolled down the window just enough to speak, but not enough for the rain to get in. Ethan, you need to move your car. I blinked, raindrops pattering against my umbrella. I'm sorry. What? The street near my driveway is flooded. I don't want to risk water damage to my car. Your carport was empty, so I assumed you wouldn't mind if I used it temporarily. I looked at my garage. My car was parked inside because I had just unloaded groceries. The carport was temporarily empty, but that didn't make it public property. Linda, I'm in the middle of an important work call, and this is my property. You can't just park here without asking. She sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. Well, I'm asking now. Just move your car out of the garage so I can pull in there instead. The carport doesn't have walls and the rain is blowing in. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity. No, Linda, I'm not moving my car. This is my property, and I need you to leave. Now, she glared at me for a solid 30 seconds, as if trying to intimidate me into submission. Then finally, with a huff, she shifted into reverse. I'll be speaking to the board about this, she snapped. There should be emergency provisions for these situations. You're being very unreasonable, Ethan. As she backed out, she deliberately sped through a puddle, splashing muddy water all over my jeans and shoes before driving off. I sighed. This wasn't over. The first strike back that evening, I received an email from the HOA, subject line, Proposed Amendment for Community Emergency Vehicle Accommodations. The proposal? A rule requiring homeowners with excess parking accommodations to make them available to neighbors during emergency weather events. Guess whose name was listed as the contact person? Linda Barnes. I forwarded the email to a lawyer friend who confirmed what I already suspected. They couldn't force me to allow others to park on my property. She helped me draft a firm response to the entire HOA board, not just Linda, shutting down any legal loophole before it could be exploited. I thought that would put an end to it. I was wrong. Linda wasn't done yet, because 3 days later I returned home from another grocery run to find something that made my blood boil. My garage door was open, and inside, sitting right in the middle like she owned the place, was Linda Barnes's Lexus, no carport this time, my actual garage, behind my locked door. My first thought was, how the hell did she get in? Then I remembered. Months ago, during a previous HOA inspection, Linda had asked for access to check some wiring that was supposedly visible from the exterior. I had given her the temporary code to the exterior keypad, never thinking she would abuse it. And now here she was, inside my garage, without my permission. A note was taped to my interior garage door. Ethan had to attend an emergency board meeting. My driveway is being resealed today, and I couldn't park on the street due to the construction on Maple. Used your garage since you were out. Thanks for understanding. Linda. I clenched the note in my fist. This was no longer just a nuisance. This was war. The never-ending invasion. I stood there staring at the note in my hand, my fingers tightening around the paper as if I could crush Linda's entitlement through sheer force of will. She had entered my garage without permission. She had used my private security code to gain access. And she had the audacity to act like I had agreed to this? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. I could have stormed over to her house and started yelling, but I knew Linda Barnes was the type of person who thrived on confrontation, especially if she thought she could play the victim. Instead, I decided to hit her where it hurt, cold, calculated consequences. The lockdown. I walked inside, grabbed my phone, and changed the garage door code immediately. Then I went one step further. I disabled the manual override from inside the house, meaning no one, not even someone who knew the old code, could open the garage remotely. I removed the garage door opener from inside the Lexus, just in case she had left one in there. I checked my security cameras and saved multiple angles of footage showing Linda entering my property unauthorized. Then I sent her a text. Me. I see you parked in my garage without permission. The code has been changed. Contact me when you return so we can discuss this breach of privacy. No response. Linda probably figured she'd just waltz back over and take her car whenever she pleased. Not this time. Linda loses her mind. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed. Linda. Ethan, I need to get my car. Open the garage. I smiled to myself before typing my response. Me. I'm in a meeting. I'll be free in an hour. In the future, please don't enter my property or use my garage without explicit permission. Silence. 10 minutes later, my doorbell started ringing. I checked my security camera. Linda was standing on my porch, furiously pressing the button over and over while talking animatedly on her phone. I let her stew for another 30 minutes before finally opening the door. She was red-faced, pacing back and forth, her expensive heels leaving imprints on my welcome mat. The moment she saw me, she exploded. This is completely unacceptable. I have been waiting for almost an hour. I have an important appointment, and you've essentially held my vehicle hostage. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, as calm as ever. For what exactly? I asked coolly. You entered my property without permission. You used a security code that was provided for a specific one-time purpose, and you left your vehicle in my private garage without consent. If anyone should be calling the authorities, it should be me." Linda sputtered, clearly unprepared for my nonchalance. "It was an emergency," she insisted. "My driveway was being resealed." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not an emergency, Linda. That's scheduled maintenance. You knew about it in advance and failed to plan accordingly. You could have called a rideshare or asked a friend to drive you. Instead, you broke into my property." Her jaw clenched and I could see the vein in her forehead pulsing. "Just open the garage now." "I'm already late." I shook my head. "We need to be clear about boundaries first. Do you understand that what you did was inappropriate and a violation of my privacy?" Linda crossed her arms, her entire body trembling with barely contained fury. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Neighbors help each other all the time. Help that is requested and agreed upon, yes, not help that is taken without permission." I held her gaze, my tone unwavering. "I need you to acknowledge that you overstepped before I opened that garage." She looked like she might spontaneously combust right there on my doorstep. Finally, she gritted her teeth and hissed, "Fine. I should have asked before using your garage. Now will you please open it?" It wasn't exactly a heartfelt apology, but it was the best I was going to get. I pulled out my phone and activated the garage door. As it lifted, Linda stormed past me without another word, climbed into her Lexus, and backed out way too fast for a residential street. As she sped off, I thought, maybe finally this is over. I was wrong. The counterattack. The next morning, I woke up to an official-looking notice taped to my front door. The document, stamped with the HOA's logo, claimed that my home office conversion was non-compliant with community regulations and would need to be restored to its original garage functionality within 30 days. I laughed out loud. Linda was trying to get revenge through HOA bureaucracy. The problem? She had no legal ground to stand on. The previous owners had obtained all the necessary permits for the garage conversion. I had lived here for 3 years, and HOA had never raised an issue about it before. This was clearly retaliatory. I forwarded the notice to my lawyer friend, who drafted a response citing legal precedents and HOA bylaws. The letter firmly rejected the demand, subtly hinting at legal action if they continued this blatant harassment. I thought that would be enough to put Linda in her place. Again, I underestimated her. That evening, I was still pondering my next move when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I checked my security camera. My heart nearly stopped. Linda's Lexus was pulling into my garage. Again. The door was open because I had been bringing in yard tools earlier and hadn't yet closed it. I watched in disbelief as she parked, stepped out of the car and walked away down the street, without even looking toward my house. No note this time. No excuse. Just a brazen assumption that my garage was hers to use whenever she pleased. I stood there, a deep, unsettling calm settling over me. "Fine, Linda. You want to play games? I'll play too." The final lockdown, I grabbed my keys, got in my own car, and drove to the nearest hardware store. I came back an hour later with a heavy-duty padlock and hasp. Then I did the one thing Linda never saw coming. I locked the garage door from the inside, not with the automatic system, but with a physical lock. A lock that could not be opened remotely, a lock that rendered her keypad code useless. Then I settled into my living room with a cup of tea and a clear view of the street, waiting for the inevitable fireworks. Linda returned 2 hours later. I watched as she approached my garage, entered her keypad code, and then frowned when nothing happened. She tried again, and again. Then she pulled out her phone, presumably to check if she had the right code. When it still didn't work, she stomped up to my front door and rang the bell. And that's when I knew the war wasn't over. It was just getting started. The battle reaches its peak. I took my time answering the door. From my security camera feed, I could see Linda pacing angrily on my porch, gripping her phone like she was preparing to call the National Guard. Her frustration was palpable. After a slow, deliberate 30-second count, I finally opened the door, leaning casually against the frame, mug of tea in hand. "Ethan," she snapped, her face flushed with rage. "The garage door seems to be malfunctioning. I need to get my car." I took a sip of my tea, savoring the moment. Oh? You mean the garage door to my private property? The one you parked in without permission? Her forced smile twitched. Look, I was in a hurry and you weren't home. The door was open. I assumed it would be fine. I set my tea down on a nearby table, folding my arms. It's not fine, Linda. We just had this conversation yesterday. You can't just assume my property is available for your use whenever you feel like it. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. Look, I don't have time for this. Just open the garage. I shook my head. Actually, Linda, I installed a manual lock inside the garage because of all the unauthorized entries I've had lately. So even if I wanted to open it remotely, I couldn't. Her mouth fell open, then snapped shut, then opened again, pure disbelief twisting her expression. You locked my car in your garage? No, Linda, I locked my garage. You just happened to park your car inside of it, without my permission. That's on you. She let out an incredulous laugh, but it was laced with pure panic. That's illegal. You can't just hold my property hostage. I cocked my head. Oh? And what law says you can trespass on someone else's property, use their garage without permission, and then demand immediate access? She stomped her foot, her entire body trembling with rage. I have an important appointment in an hour, Ethan. I shrugged. Well, I'll be free tomorrow morning at 9. You can get it then. She lost it. You cannot be serious. Oh, I'm very serious. Linda, you've left me notices, tried to rewrite HOA rules just to inconvenience me, filed retaliatory complaints, and now you've repeatedly trespassed on my property. Consider this a natural consequence of your actions. She clenched her fists, taking deep breaths, her face a dangerous shade of red. I'm calling the police. I grinned. Please do. I saw the flicker of hesitation in her eyes. She knew she was in the wrong. If she called the police, she'd have to explain why her car was in my garage in the first place, and I had all the security footage to back up my case. Still, her pride wouldn't let her back down completely. With a frustrated growl, she pulled out her phone and stomped off to the curb, muttering angrily under her breath. The authorities get involved. 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. I watched as Officer Jenkins, a local cop I'd seen around the neighborhood, stepped out and approached Linda, who was dramatically gesturing toward my garage like she was reporting a serious crime. I waited patiently, arms crossed, as Jenkins listened to her rant for a good 5 minutes before making his way to me. Afternoon, Mr. Carter. Mind telling me what's going on? Of course, officer, I said, completely calm. Linda parked in my garage without my permission. Again, so I secured my property. He raised an eyebrow. She parked inside your garage? I nodded and pulled up my security footage on my phone, showing Linda entering my garage, parking, and walking away like she owned the place. Jenkins let out a low whistle. Well, that's pretty clear-cut trespassing. He turned back toward Linda, who was still fuming at the curb. Ma'am, did you park in his garage without permission? Linda folded her arms. It was open. It wasn't like I broke in. Ma'am, that's still trespassing. You can't just use someone else's property because it's convenient for you. Linda's nostrils flared. So you're just going to let him hold my car hostage? Jenkins sighed. Ma'am, your car is in his garage. He's not holding it hostage. You parked it there yourself, and I can't force him to open his garage for you. That's a civil matter, not a criminal one. Her eyes bulged. You can't be serious. Dead serious, ma'am. If you want to get your car, you'll have to work it out with him. But I strongly suggest you stop trespassing before you end up with actual legal trouble. Linda gritted her teeth so hard I thought she might crack a molar. Fine, she spat. Tomorrow at 9. She stormed away without another word. The final straw. The next morning at exactly 8:59 a.m., Linda showed up, but she wasn't alone. 2 other HOA board members stood beside her. Michael Reed, the level-headed older guy, and Sarah Collins, the new member who seemed unsure why she was even there. Linda folded her arms triumphantly. I've brought witnesses to ensure there are no further misunderstandings. I smirked. Excellent. More witnesses to see you take accountability. Michael cleared his throat. Ethan, we understand there have been some disputes and we'd like to resolve them amicably. I'm always open to reasonable discussion, I said smoothly. But let's be clear. Linda has repeatedly entered my property without permission. She's filed false complaints against me, and now she's once again trying to use HOA authority to harass me. I pulled out a folder containing every notice, text message, and security footage, still showing Linda's behavior. Michael's eyebrows shot up. He turned to Linda. You parked in his garage without permission? Linda waved a dismissive hand. It was an emergency. He's making a big deal out of nothing. Sarah frowned. Linda, you told us he agreed to let you park there and then maliciously locked your car inside. That doesn't seem to be true. Linda's face flushed deep red. I left him a note the first time, she snapped. A note is not permission, I pointed out. And there wasn't even a note this time, just you assuming my property was yours to use. Michael sighed. Linda, just get your car and let's talk about this at the community center. Linda seethed, but she marched to her car, yanked the door open, and backed out so aggressively Sarah had to step aside to avoid getting hit. As she sped off, I knew she wasn't done. The petty revenge move that afternoon, I returned home from running errands and saw something that made my blood boil. Linda had parked in my driveway, not in the garage this time, but directly in front of it, blocking my access completely. This was no longer a battle of convenience. This was war. I pulled out my phone, dialed the non-emergency police line, and then I called a tow truck. Final showdown. I stood there for a moment, staring at Linda's Lexus, parked dead center in my driveway, blocking my garage entirely. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't miscommunication. This was deliberate. Linda had lost every round so far. She had tried to harass me through HOA rules. She had called the cops on me and lost. She had brought HOA board members to witness her victory, only to humiliate herself. Now she had resorted to the pettiest, most childish move yet. She wanted a reaction, so I gave her one. I calmly pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency police line. Hello, I'd like to report an unauthorized vehicle blocking access to my garage. The owner has a history of trespassing on my property. Then, without missing a beat, I called a tow truck company and requested a private property tow. Two could play this game. The police arrive again. 20 minutes later, Officer Jenkins arrived again. He barely had to ask what was happening before I gestured toward the white Lexus blocking my garage. She left it there on purpose, I explained, pulling up my security footage showing Linda pulling in, parking, and walking away smugly. Jenkins sighed like a man who had seen too much HOA drama in his lifetime. Let me talk to her, he muttered, heading toward Linda's house. A few minutes later, I saw Linda storming toward my driveway, fuming, her phone clenched in one hand. Ethan, this is absurd, she shrieked. You're taking this way too far. I stayed perfectly calm. No, Linda, you took this too far. You've parked in my garage. You've trespassed. You've tried to rewrite HOA rules just to inconvenience me. You filed false complaints against me. And now you're blocking my property out of pure spite. I'm done playing games. She looked at Jenkins, expecting him to side with her. Officer, tell him he can't just tow my car. Jenkins crossed his arms. Actually, ma'am, he can. It's private property. You're parked without permission. He has every right to have your car towed. Her face turned red as a tomato. This is harassment. No, Linda, I said smoothly. This is a consequence of your actions. Something you should be very familiar with by now. She let out a furious scream of frustration, just as the tow truck pulled up. Her eyes widened in horror. You wouldn't. I folded my arms. Watch me. The tow truck driver stepped out, clipboard in hand. Jenkins gave him the all clear. Linda panicked. Fine, I'll move it, she shrieked, running toward her car like a madwoman. She jumped in, slammed the door, and floored it in reverse so hard her tires squealed. I smirked as she sped off like a spoiled child who had just lost a game. The last stand, HOA emergency meeting. The next day, I received an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. An emergency HOA meeting had been scheduled for the following evening. The topic? Parking violations and property use restrictions. Signed, of course, by Linda Barnes. I almost laughed. She just wouldn't give up. But I wasn't about to walk into her trap unprepared. This time, I brought my lawyer. When Linda saw us walk into the meeting, her smug expression vanished instantly. The room was packed. HOA board members, residents, even a few people who had no stake in the issue but had heard the rumors and wanted to see the drama unfold. Linda stood at the front, trying to spin a sob story about how I had repeatedly harassed her and wrongfully locked her car in my garage. I let her talk. Then I stood up, walked to the front, and handed out copies of my security footage and documented complaints against Linda. Every single petty notice, every single trespass, every single attempt she made to manipulate the HOA into enforcing rules that only affected me. By the time I was done, the entire room was staring at Linda like she had grown a second head. Michael Reed, the level-headed HOA member, rubbed his temples and sighed. Linda, you never mentioned any of this. Sarah Collins, the newer board member, looked at me apologetically. Ethan, I had no idea she was doing all this. I thought this was just a simple dispute. I nodded. It wasn't. It was targeted harassment. Then I turned to Linda. You've spent months trying to bully me, Linda. You've misused HOA authority, tried to manipulate the rules, trespassed on my property, and now you're trying to paint yourself as the victim. It's not going to work anymore. Linda's face was frozen in shock. She had lost. Badly. Michael cleared his throat and looked around the room. I think it's safe to say this meeting isn't about parking violations. It's about a pattern of abuse. Effective immediately, we will be reviewing HOA governance procedures and... He hesitated for just a second before delivering the final blow. Removing Linda Barnes from the HOA board. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Linda's eyes widened. You can't do that, she screeched. Michael adjusted his glasses. Yes, we can. And we just did. The entire neighborhood had turned against her, and she knew it. The aftermath 3 weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in Linda's yard. She was leaving. I wasn't sure whether she had been pressured out or if she just couldn't stand living in a neighborhood where she was no longer queen of the HOA. On moving day, I watched from my porch as movers loaded her precious Lexus onto a trailer, her Linda Time vanity plate reflecting the late afternoon sun. Just before she got into her car, our eyes met across the street. For a moment, I thought she might say something. A snide remark, a final insult, some desperate attempt at salvaging her pride. Instead, she just gave a tight nod and looked away. I raised my coffee mug in a mock toast. And then, just like that, Linda Barnes drove out of my life forever.